Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my Total War Warhammer 2 Legendary Lord lore video on Kroq-Gar. Now, a quick caveat before we start our video on Kroq-Gar, guys. This video has been taken mainly from my Total War Warhammer 2 Likely Legendary Lords for the Lizardmen edition of my video series. So if you've seen that video already, feel free to skip this one. If you haven't, please do join us for the ride and we will talk about Kroq-Gar. Now, Kroq-Gar is one of the most ancient lizardmen alive today, having emerged from the spawning pools amongst an elite group of other Saurus a few centuries before the Great Catastrophe. Him and his brothers were born on the same day, as well as a newly born pack of Carnosaurs, and he picked the largest and most vicious of them to be his mount. Now, Kroq-Gar used to be part of the garrisons of the city of Hexoatl. Now, this puts him being born around negative 5,900 of the Imperial calendar, putting him at around 8,000 years old as of the current Total War Warhammer timeline. Now, Saurus essentially live forever if they don't die in battle, as far as I understand it. So, Kroq-Gar and his elite brothers were born in this city of Hexoatl. Now, during the Great Catastrophe, which is the invasion of chaos from the world, Kroq-Gar and his brothers proved themselves unmatched in combat by any other of their kind. They were just absolute killing machines. It seemed born expressly for this purpose, and indeed, many of the Lizardmen believe that spawning pools are kind of set on timers. They have very little way of knowing what's going to get born when, but the old ones were such meticulous planners, goes the belief, that when something is born, it's born for a particular purpose at a particular time. And so it seemed that Kroq-Gar and his brothers had been particularly born to help fend off these hordes and hordes of chaos. At some point during the Great Catastrophe, the city of Hexoatl had been completely surrounded, and indeed the barriers of the Slan Mage priests in the city protected them for a number of years, but eventually the tides of chaos were so overwhelming the chaos managed to break through these barriers and indeed march on the city itself. They managed to surround all the Lizardmen and really just take over the entirety of the city. Kroq-Gar led the army of survivors and managed to punch his way through the surrounding chaos forces and escape with an army of survivors, really just fueled by rage and the last blessings of the Slan Mage priests upon his soldiers so they could march out and really try and survive this absolute decimation. For centuries after, Kroq-Gar and his surviving forces couldn't really manage to make it to another temple city, and they spent the rest of the Great Catastrophe fighting battle after battle in the jungles of Lustria, just trying to fight through this oncoming hordes of chaos, unprotected by walls, and little by little, these armies had been whittled down and whittled down. Eventually the day came when Kroq-Gar and only a few of his brothers were left standing, and a mighty host of chaos descended upon them. The deeds him and his brothers committed that day would be forever remembered in Kroq-Gar's mind and in tales of legend, but they were just fighting savagely. All seemed absolutely lost, and then all of a sudden, as Kroq-Gar was swinging his mighty weapon around, fighting what he knew would be his last battle, all of the greater demons of chaos and the demons of chaos suddenly vanished. For what had happened was the vortex had suddenly taken shape, and the excess chaos energy of the world had been drained away, and the demons could no longer persist in the realm of the Warhammer world. Kroq-Gar looked around for his surviving brothers, only to find he was the last remaining soldier of the city of Hexoatl, and only him and his Carnosaur Grimlock had managed to survive the onslaught of chaos. And it was with great sadness he eventually sort of made it back to a temple city, where he was greeted by Mazdamundi, who would go on to be recognized as the oldest living of the Slan Mage priests at the time. Although Mazdamundi himself is young enough that he never actually met the old ones. So bear that in mind. That's how many of the greater Slan Mage priests had died in the Great Catastrophe. Now, Mazdamundi himself said, "Oh, Kroq-Gar, you have just been essentially fighting by yourself in the jungle for the last few hundred years. Your skills are truly unmatched. You shall lead the armies of the Lizardmen." So Kroq-Gar is very much the head general of the Lizardmen as things stand at the moment. And as such, Mazdamundi gave him a couple of gifts the ancient ones used to have to be his weapons. These were namely the Hands of the Gods, which allowed him to sear and burn away his enemies, the revered Spear of Talangsla. And with these weapons, Kroq-Gar began to wage war all over the known world. It said there isn't a continent in the Warhammer world he hasn't fought on, and indeed there are a number of incidents in Lustria itself where he's earned his name as the general of the Lizardmen, namely in the Shrunken Head War, where he fought off a huge greenskin invasion by himself slaying all 6 war bosses of the greenskin tribes off the Scorpion coast of Lustria. In the year 1237, when demons overran the temple city of Zahutek, Kroq-Gar was there to contain it and defeat the demons that had appeared. In the year around the year 2512, which is technically after the starting time of Total War Warhammer, the Dark Elves, not being able to go through the Grey Mountains, launched an invasion by sea on the Lizardmen territories. During this invasion, it was in fact Kroq-Gar who fought back a raiding party of Dark Elves, and indeed managed to fight them all the way to the coast, whereupon the Slan Mage Priests were able to ground one of the Black Arcs, the Black Arc named Umbral Tide. And by grounding it, they allowed the Lizardmen to march over it and destroy one of the Black Arcs, which is not an easy feat in itself. More recently even than that, in the year 2522 of the Imperial calendar, which is technically almost 22 years after the current time, the 20 years after the current Total War Warhammer timeline, but really right up to date with the tabletop timeline, the Dark Elves struck again, this time with a host of chaos at their back as well. The Dark Elves still had the problem of the Grey Mountains, a sentient mountain range to protect the Lizardmen, so the Dark Elves had actually discovered this route called the Blackways, which was actually an underground tunnel of rivers which they could get through, which would put them straight in the heart of Lustria. Now, being the northernmost temple city and really the first line of defense from any kind of northern aggression, Mazdamundi's city of Hexoatl was the first to be hit. Now, a fantastically named character called, I hope I'm getting the pronunciation right, but if I'm not, I really don't care because I'm going to call him this anyway, is Tic-Tac-Toe. Now, Tic-Tac-Toe was the head of the Pterodon Riders, which is essentially the pterodactyl riders of the Lizardmen in Hexoatl. Now, he started to scout out, and because the defenses, the Dark Elves and the Chaos had somehow managed to subvert the natural kind of waystone-like defenses. They're called Sentinel Stones, I think, for the Lizardmen rather than waystones. Much like the Wood Elves. The Sentinel Stone defenses, they'd managed to enter into Lustria largely undetected, but it was Tic-Tac-Toe on his Pterodon scouting around the area that managed to spot this army first, and he immediately rode back to Hexoatl to tell Mazdamundi. However, Mazdamundi wasn't there. So Tic-Tac-Toe was de facto in charge because there was no one more senior than him around Hexoatl at the time. So Tic-Tac-Toe bravely, a little skink that he is, begins to launch a defense of Hexoatl and starts to hit this marching Chaos and Dark Elf army with hit and run tactics with him and his Pterodon riders, dropping rocks on their heads, ambushing them whenever they get an opportunity, really just harassing and haranguing them all the way to the temple city itself. However, he wasn't able to stop them, he just didn't have the forces. So he locks the doors and they begin the siege of Hexoatl. And this siege goes on for several months. The Lizardmen are just barely holding on. This is a significant force. During this siege, Chaos had deployed horrible creations that the Lizardmen had never seen before. War machines that had managed to entrap demon souls, launched with devastating effect against the temple city itself. A lot of the leading generals who would normally be leading the army of Hexoatl aren't there, and Tic-Tac-Toe is really just trying to do his best, and he puts up a valiant effort and indeed holds out for several months. And just as the defensive are about to be breached, the sort of puddles of mud around the Chaos and Dark Elf camp begin to, shudder. Boom, boom, boom. And ripples start to appear in these little puddles. And they're like, what on earth is going on? And none other than the great champion of the Lizardmen on his enormous Carnosaur burst out of the jungle and start to munch down on the squishy Dark Elves and armor-plated Chaos Warriors. Him and his dinosaur and the enormous host they were leading fall upon the Chaos Hordes and start to engage in battle. Not only that, from the other side of the jungle, another enormous Lizardmen host led by none other than Mazdamundi himself And once Mazda Mundi arrived, he opened up a huge chasm in the earth that's said to have swallowed half of the Chaos Hordes almost immediately. Him on his Stegodon, on his throne, starts to rain down all kinds of devastating magics on this Chaos Horde, and they just charge in, fighting all the hordes of chaos at once. Kroq-Gar, Mazda Mundi, completely wrecking this host of chaos and dark elves who dared to lay siege to a temple city of the Lizardmen. Absolutely terrifying. If you ask me to fight dinosaur creatures, I'd be shitting my pants, as I imagine many of the Chaos Warriors were as well. So they managed to fight off this Chaos Herd in a famous victory amongst the Lizardmen, just absolutely annihilating the hordes of chaos, the old enemy, and really doing it very thoroughly and efficiently. After the dust settled, it said a 20-mile ring around the city was just completely flattened and annihilated. That's how devastating the battle was. Kroq-Gar helped Mazda Mundi lift the siege of chaos upon the city and really start a new wave of aggression for the Lizardmen against all the forces that the old ones did not intend to have take part. And it's either our way or the highway for the Lizardmen. If you stand in any way in opposition to them, they will consider you an enemy and not part of the great plan, and so you too will be destroyed. With Kroq-Gar and his Carnosaur Grimlock looking to be the first to absolutely bite your head off. Now, in terms of Kroq-Gar and his gear itself, as we mentioned, he has the Hands of Gods and the Revered Spear of Talangsla. Now, the Hands of Gods is essentially this metal, if you look on the picture on the right, it's essentially this metal gauntlet that he's been given, and it gives him the bound spell of Shen's Burning Gaze. And we've seen bound spells before in Total War Warhammer, which is essentially a magic spell you can use on a cooldown that's not affected by the winds of magic. So Kroq-Gar will have a projectile weapon that he can fire from his golden gauntlet. And he also has the spear. Now, the spear itself is said to have been wielded by one of the old ones. The old one, Talangsla, who is said to be one of the most warlike of the old one gods. It's said to hum with an ancient energy. It does magical damage as it's a magic weapon. It gives Kroq-Gar increased strength, which is essentially a weapon strength boost on Total War Warhammer. And when he wounds with it, I'm not going to get into the rules, but it essentially goes into the morale rules of the tabletop game. So it should really have an aura of negative leadership around it as well, the spear. So negative leadership gives him increased weapon strength, and really just a handy thing to have, particularly as he will cause fear and I think terror as well, due to the fact that it's a dinosaur riding a dinosaur, and that's terrifying. That is Kroq-Gar. He will be really the pinnacle of the melee lords in Total War Warhammer for the Lizardmen. And that about sums it up for Kroq-Gar, guys. We've had him confirmed by Creative Assembly at this stage already, so super looking forward to seeing him in Total War Warhammer 2. As always, guys, a huge thank you for watching. Special thanks to my patrons, John, Reese, Colin, Thomas, Mateus, Samuel, and Matthews. Thanks, guys, for supporting me, and thank you all again, and I hope to catch you all on the next one.